Welcome to the Salon podcast. I'm your host, Michael Shermer. Every week we bring you an author with a new book. This week is Geoffrey Miller, the evolutionary psychologist. His new book is an ebook, digital book, Virtue Signaling, Essays on Darwinian Politics and Free Speech. It's just a couple of bucks. You can find it online just by Googling his name or the book, Virtue Signaling. It's a super interesting conversation. I think this is the longest podcast I've had yet. 2 hours, 2 hours and 1 minute. So we're about halfway through a Joe Rogan marathon, as I joked. My podcasts are usually shorter, but he is such an interesting man. He has thought about a lot of the most important issues of our day. So we just grind through them. Obviously, he's bringing to all of these issues an evolutionary psych perspective, but more than that, he, as he says at the very end, his friends and people cannot predict his position on different issues, immigration, abortion, whatever, gun control and whatnot, because he thinks them through each individually rather than I'm in this tribe and this is what my tribe believes, so I believe that. So I very much admire that. And so if you appreciate the podcast, as usual, I need to ask for support. We do need your support. Skeptic Society is a 501c3 nonprofit. And the Science Salon podcast is part of that. So you can support us at skeptic.com/donate or through Patreon. And so with that, thanks for listening. And here is Geoffrey Miller talking about virtue signaling. Geoffrey Miller, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Glad to be on.
Well, we kind of specialize in new books, and usually I hold up the book. So here I'm going to hold up my iPhone snapshot of the cover of your new book, which is on just a digital book. It's an ebook. Virtue Signaling, Essays on Darwinian Politics and Free Speech. Love the peacock cover, obviously. Thanks. Tapping on Darwin's original headaches he got over worrying about where the peacock's tail came from. Now we know. Just by way of, for our listeners, the essays include Political Peacocks, The Handicap Principle, Why Bother to Speak, Sexual Selection for Moral Virtues, The Google Memo, The Neurodiversity Case for Free Speech, and The Cultural Diversity Case for Free Speech. Those last two, if I recall, from Quillette or maybe the Google Memo as well. In any case, so we can hit all those, but I liked in your preface that you gave us a little bit of personal background, which I didn't really know much about you personally. So let's dive in there. You were at Columbia University, right? And you experienced some political protests over apartheid, and that kind of got you into the whole realm of political psychology and then evolutionary psychology and so on.
Yeah, I did undergraduate at Columbia University in New York, 1983 to 87. And right in the middle of that, we had massive anti-apartheid protests. And it was really striking. Of course, no one on campus supported South African apartheid, black-white divisions in where people can live and where they can work and all that. But it was really striking to me that thousands of undergraduates would suddenly care so much about this issue when, a year before, nobody had really talked about it. So it looked like this social cause was subject to the same kind of sort of fads and fashions that affect clothing style or musical style. And I saw the protests for a period of weeks in the springtime of a particular year. And my window actually overlooked the protests. So as a budding psych major, I could kind of witness the human behavior and see what everybody was doing. And it raised a lot of questions about what is going on here? Why are these young people so motivated to invest time and energy and, even risk failing classes to protest something that they didn't sort of care about a year earlier?
And the answer is a kind of virtue signaling.
Yeah, I think it was only later that I would call it virtue signaling, but it was clear that it was some kind of display and that it had some kind of sexual or social function for the students.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them were making friends and meeting up and finding mates. And so it wasn't entirely pointless. But if you'd asked them, hey, are you going to the protest to find a boyfriend or girlfriend? They would have taken serious umbrage and like, no, it's really about the geopolitical issue. It's really about racism.
Right. Well, I wonder if that's because most of us are not really aware or self-aware of our own inner motives. We just concoct a story that makes sense. No one says I'm religious because I was raised to be religious or it makes me feel good. They say, well, I have, those are the best arguments I've ever heard. So that's the answer I give.
Yeah, we have this thing called choice blindness, which is we don't really understand the reasons why we choose particular behaviors or causes or ideologies or moral virtues. And I think particularly in the domain of human sexuality, we tend to be quite self-deceived and self-deluded for very good functional reasons, right? You want plausible deniability. Oh, no, I'm not just going to the protest, to pick up chicks or boys or whatever. It's really about the cause. And yet, people's behavior tracks very closely the kind of social and mating incentives to do that behavior.
Yeah. Even though we might see that in other people. For example, you might recognize that other people believe in God because it gives them comfort or makes them feel good or whatever, but we don't see that in ourselves, or at least it doesn't sound like a plausible argument. So you would attribute to yourself, I'm in favor of gun control because the following statistics, but those other guys are for guns because they're gun nuts. We don't attribute to them that they have really good arguments.
Yeah. So once you first hear about virtue signaling, you see it everywhere as the stuff that the other tribe does, the other side does. Oh, that's just virtue signaling. That's just virtue signaling. But then you level up and you get some self-awareness and you realize, oh no, we're all doing it all the time. And once you're at a state where you can attribute virtue signaling to yourself as often as you do to others, that's when you really get the idea.
Yeah. So how does that relate to fundamental attribution bias then? It's sort of a form of that?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought about that, which I should have done because Lee Ross, who invented the term fundamental attribution error, was on my dissertation committee at Stanford and helped shape my thinking about social psychology. But yeah, fundamental attribution error is thinking that everybody else's behavior is caused by stable internal traits, whereas my behavior is never caused by my traits. It's just my reaction to circumstances and situations and incentives. And likewise, I guess, with virtue signaling, if you see somebody else's behavior, you'll attribute it to, oh, you're one of those virtue signaling narcissists.
Right.
Whereas I'm just responding to the objective moral facts about the world, right, as I see them.
Yeah, as I was reading your book, other psych concepts that popped to my mind was pluralistic ignorance, where you think that everybody else thinks something, and so you go along with it, even though most people think like you and they're not into it.
Yeah, and this relates to virtue signaling where, we all have our little models of what everybody else believes to be the virtues worth signaling, right? And so we all run around doing that based on a sort of understanding of what is publicly acceptable and honorable in our culture currently. But actually, a lot of people are quite miscalibrated about that. And, one way to overcome pluralistic ignorance is social surveys and polls. And you suddenly see, oh, a certain percentage of people are doing some weird thing, whether it's polyamory or being against semi-automatic rifles or whatever the issue is. And before that, your mental model of social reality had been miscalibrated. So I think another way to kind of overcome bad virtue signaling is to try to overcome that pluralistic ignorance and actually just get more accurate at, hey, what do other people actually believe?
Yeah. And the other thing I thought of was preemptive denunciation. That is denouncing other people before they denounce you. That's kind of a signaling, like I'm one of the good guys, so don't think about attacking me because look how much I'm attacking those other guys.
Yeah, my little ebook doesn't address very much the time dimension of how fast do you do virtue signaling, but you can also see that people who just have a faster cycle in terms of responding to news or Twitter or denunciations or credible threats of denunciation might actually have an advantage. And I think this is actually one reason why social media is so addictive. It's not really that it's addictive, it's that we're worried that something's going on that we're not tuned into that might be a threat to us personally or, our group.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back to defining it. Actually, I did watch most of the interview you sent me with your fiancée, Diana Fleischman. By the way, congratulations.
Thanks.
Since you've tweeted about it, I guess we can talk about it for a moment. You actually tweeted the ring you designed, a picture of the ring, and it's gorgeous. But that's kind of a virtue signal. Like, I mean, why do you have to tell your 100,000 followers or whatever that, look, I designed this ring and look how awesome it is? That's kind of a virtue signal.
Oh, absolutely. But it's a good kind of virtue signal.
Yeah. Of course, she obviously liked it.
Yeah. So in my old Spent book 10 years ago, towards the end, I sort of give advice about, hey, how can you escape conspicuous consumption, runaway consumerism if you want to? And one of the bits of advice in there was actually about engagement rings. It was saying, hey, if you want a decent engagement ring, you can go the diamond route and give a huge chunk of your money to the De Beers cartel. And I advised against that. So that's not a diamond in my ring. That's a moissanite. I prefer moissanite. It's a better stone, but it's cheaper.
I don't know what.
I could never afford a 3-carat diamond. So it's a moissi. But I also advised, hey, if you want to show romantic commitment, particularly, then designing something yourself or making it yourself is a very credible display of commitment. And so in a way, sharing the engagement ring design and even giving people some detail about, hey, it's not that hard to do this. All you have to do is be able to describe it verbally, do some drawings, send it to a jeweler who's got a CAD CAM system for rapid prototyping, and boom, you can have a unique ring that actually costs, not much more than going to the mall and getting some random ring.
The other signal it is, since I have one too, is I'm off the dating market. I am now spoken for. Yeah.
Now, in our case, since we're polyamorous and we have an open relationship, that's not as relevant, but it is still a commitment signal of saying we're planning to be together for a very long time, and have a family together and do all the things that married couples do.
Are you going to do that? You think?
Have kids? Yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah,
sure.
You should do it. Yeah, you're a young man.
I'm pronatalist. So.
You're pronatalist. I guess I must be too. I had a kid at, I have a 27-year-old daughter and I have a 3-year-old son. I was 61 when I had my son. It's never too late, at least for guys anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah. But so since you've also publicly talked about polyamory, how does that work in terms of, since you're an evolutionary psychologist and I read carefully David Buss's book on jealousy, how do you override the green monster? It's a pretty strong emotion.
It's a really strong emotion, and it takes a while to learn how to tame it. One of the striking things to me is, there's a lot of the so-called manosphere, right? The pickup artists and the red pill guys and the people who advocate for men's rights and all of that. And often they're quite stoical in their outlook, like you should go read Epictetus, you should master your feelings, etc. But the one thing they never try to master is jealousy. It's kind of off the table as something that's potentially subject to voluntary control or mental hacks or tips. But I think it actually helps enormously to have evolutionary psychology insight into emotions. I've taught a course on polyamory, but I've also taught a course on human emotions 10 or 12 times. And we talk about jealousy a lot and the research by people like David Buss. And once you understand the adaptive functions of jealousy, then you can kind of start taking off the table which are the things that are no longer relevant, right? If we use contraception, then paternity uncertainty, not knowing whose kid is yours, isn't as relevant. If you do regular STI testing and safer sex, then STI transmission is not as relevant, a function of jealousy. And if you're fully committed and you know that, hey, I'm a unique match to my partner, it would be very hard for her to find someone as suited to her as I am, and vice versa, then that kind of reduces the likelihood of mate switching.
So this has some implications for free will, or free won't, if you will. If you're aware of the emotions and you know how future you would have responded, but the new future you, now that the current you knows what's going to happen to future you can modify the response to the incoming stimuli and change it. maybe.
Yeah, I mean, of course, my whole field, psychology, is a gambit that says, hey, we hope our individual lives and society as a whole will be better if we consciously understand how our brains work and how our minds and emotions work. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't true. I think it's true. There's some interesting arguments to the contrary that no, you shouldn't become aware of these things. But so far, I'm kind of on the side of science that the more we know about the human mind and how it works, and emotions like jealousy and how it works, then the more control we can take over them, and the more adaptable we can be to new circumstances like 21st century life.
Yeah. I like Bill Maher's line from Religulous, where he's talking about jealousy. You know what? The first commandment, I am the Lord your God, a jealous God. And he says, I know people that have gotten over jealousy. How can a God not get over jealousy? Of course, in a way, I guess that's a kind of virtue signal that you are so committed to your particular religion, you're willing to acknowledge that you'll be punished for it otherwise, or something like that.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point. If your God can't even overcome jealousy, then where's your role model for a human doing it?
Yeah. So virtue signaling as a concept, you mentioned it's not that old. Well, the concept is very old, actually, but the term, I don't even remember when it started. It's like one of those things like 9/11. I have no idea who invented the term 9/11 or when we all started using it. It just happened on a Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and all of a sudden everybody started using it. I like everyone else, I just hurled it as an insult. That these are what these crazy far left people are doing. They're just virtue signaling. But if you pull back for a moment and think, well, actually, it's a pretty honorable thing to do. Like, I want to signal that I'm a virtuous person. That's a good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. My whole model of human moral evolution for 25 years or so, even 30, has been the urge to show off our moral traits to potential friends and allies and mates is the mainspring of human moral evolution. That's what drove us to care about other people beyond just myself, my kids, my family, and my local clan or tribe. You know, it's really hard to run a model of moral evolution that leads to a species capable of caring about other species or people outside your tribe if you don't have some kind of moral signaling or virtue signaling. So I think, geez, without virtue signaling, there's really no prospect for like world peace or people getting along with other races or other religions or any of that. That just, you're dead in the water without virtue signaling. But of course, it's an instinct that can be used well or used poorly. And I think what we did see circa 2016, when the term got really popular during the presidential election, was a lot of people in the center and the conservatives seeing that, oh, the far left is really kind of abusing their virtue signaling instincts by showing off their interest in all kinds of weird causes that don't actually affect them personally and that don't actually bring real sustainable benefits to society.
Yeah. You and I both hammered the far left on social media, so let's not leave out the far right too. I think a lot of Trump followers are just virtue signaling. They don't really know anything about what he's talking about. He may not know what he's talking about when he talks about tariffs and trade and economic issues in particular. I think he's clueless, but in a way, it's just sort of signaling. I mean, one more stat: 81% of white evangelicals voted for Trump, who has to be the least Christian, least moral president ever. So obviously, he's a proxy for something else, not moral, not religion's morality, but politics or political issues like guns or abortion or something, immigration, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Trump embodied a lot of virtues that the left doesn't even consider virtues, of course, like respect. And this goes back to Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, and all those different moral foundations, right? Yeah. Where the conservatives actually care about things like moral purity and respect for authority and hierarchy. And apart from that, things like traditional masculinity as a virtue, kind of being an alpha male who sort of takes care of you. And then things like loyalty and patriotism. So Trump embodied, I think, for a lot of the right, this virtue of, build a wall, make America great. That's a pure loyalty, patriotic pitch.
Right.
And it's one where the left is like, what do you mean nation? What do you mean America? We're in a one world,
global,
subject to global warming,
right.
facing global issues. Why would you treat that as a virtue signal rather than just an instance of parochial, short-sighted xenophobia?
Yeah. Interestingly, I find it somewhat contradictory that the left is critical of globalization. I would think, liberalism is we want to knock down political and economic borders and just let people just interact with each other, and that'll reduce tribalism and so on. But globalization has other, I guess, economic implications for shipping cheap jobs overseas and not paying more wages to Americans. But that's kind of a Trumpian argument.
It's very confusing because I guess the standard leftist argument would be you could have no borders to movement of people, no borders to movement of goods, no borders to capital investment, if you just dismantle all of capitalism first.
Right.
Oh, and also all of patriarchy first.
Right.
And also all of organized religion first. And then once you get to that triple utopia, then you can have globalization.
Right.
So I'll be holding my breath for that.
We're a ways from that. Well, the experiment may be run first on Mars. I have a big article coming out in Quillette in the fall on governing Mars. We can
awesome.
we can run the experiment there. And do we know anything that we should take with us? Yeah, actually, we know a lot because the experiment's been run for thousands of years here on Earth, and we know what doesn't work, and then we know what works slightly better or not as bad as some of these other systems and so on. So it'll be interesting to see as if this happens and populations grow over the next century or two. Elon projects, thousands and then millions of people, if natural borders will happen, if there will be cartels or monopolies that naturally develop. I mean, on Mars, this would be a serious problem if somebody monopolizes the air and the water, because you have to produce it with machines. So who owns the machines? And is it, commonly owned by everybody? Do you have competition and you pick your providers, or, how's this going to work? And then as it spreads across the planet, are you going to see walls being built? Is this part of human nature, or is this the kind of thing, even if it is it the kind of thing we could overcome pretty quickly culturally in a new experiment?
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see what happens on Mars sexually, socially, culturally, politically. Also, what kind of virtue signaling systems do we want to promote on Mars? Because you do want some, you'll want the Martian colonists to be advertising certain virtues that are relevant to that extremely harsh, dangerous environment. They might reinvent kind of, Western settler virtues of self-reliance and local community engagement and all of that. Or they might try to invent some kind of more globalist-oriented Mars perspective that's like, this is one planet, we are all extremely dependent on each other. The infrastructure of survival is fragile. But I think what we're going to see is probably a bunch of different experiments playing out in parallel, and it'll be literal survival of the fittest again at the kind of group level.
Yeah, it could happen much faster there just because the numbers will be smaller and there'll be more experiments, I would imagine, than happens here, which is just glacially slow. Any case, so back to the use of virtue signaling and in an evolutionary context. Let's kind of go back in time. You're an evolutionary psychologist, and that all rose really starting in the 70s with Ed Wilson's book, Sociobiology, 1976. And then you had the evolution wars in the 80s where Gould and Lewontin went after Wilson for telling just so stories, or at least the political implications of his final two chapters of that book. But then by, I'd say, the mid to late 90s, I think the evolutionary psychologist, as it became to be called, really, I think, won the evolution wars there. At least that's how I interpret it. And it's become fairly mainstream. So address just some of the common criticism you have. You guys are just telling just those stories. The stories you tell in your new book about virtue signaling, how do you know that evolved? How do you know that's not a spandrel or some sort of a co-adaptation for something else it was selected for? And how do you test those hypotheses?
Yeah. So evolutionary psychology gets this charge that you're just making up stuff all the time. Well, that's fine, but I've supervised about 10 PhD students, and we've run dozens of studies. And a typical outcome of any given psychology study, of course, is you get weak results, ambiguous results, null results, and it doesn't support your hypothesis. You have to rethink your hypothesis, publish a different paper, do a new study, etc. So at the level of day-to-day science, we are not just sitting around armchair theorizing and sort of making up theories and not testing them. When you go to the major EvPsych annual conference, Human Behavior and Evolution Society, HBES, you get hundreds of researchers giving talks that are like, study 1 and 2 didn't work. We were surprised. We didn't get the results we thought. Study 3 sent us off in a new direction, etc. So it works exactly like any other mainstream science does. You have a theoretical framework. You come up with hypotheses. You test them. You revise the hypotheses, usually. Sometimes you revise the theoretical framework. It's a feedback loop. And EvPsych is just different in that we're trying to build on this incredible foundation, which is evolutionary biology, which has already done most of the hard work for us of investigating behavior in thousands of other species and giving us incredibly valuable so-called mid-level theories like kin selection theory, reciprocal altruism theory, sexual strategies theory from David Buss. We use all of those, and the beauty of it is they apply not just to our species, but to many, many other primates, mammals, vertebrates, etc. So I guess that's what I would say is like, at the day-to-day level, we often test hypotheses and they don't work, and we have to rethink them. And then at the macro level, our field is pretty stable, and we haven't faced the same replication crisis as social psychology, because they started from kind of a blank slate, literally. They didn't have any theory of human social behavior. And we did have a theory already. We just borrowed it from biology.
Right. I think of evolutionary psych as kind of an equal opportunity offender. The left doesn't like it because it challenges the blank slate model. The right doesn't like it because you treat humans like we're just apes. Well, we are apes, but the Christian right especially wants us to be more than apes. There's something more in there. Although a lot of people on the right like some of the kind of genetic arguments because it gels well with their Christian notion of a human nature that God imprinted in us certain characteristics that are just part of what we're born with, as however you think God did that, and the evidence that evolutionary psych or behavior geneticists come up with seems to gel well with the Christian notion of human nature, except for certain things where they want a soul or free will or whatever.
Yeah, I guess in a weird way, a lot of my career has been focused on the distinctively human aspects of our species, things like general intelligence and creativity and sense of humor and art and music. Those are really my passions, and that's what I try to explain with books like The Mating Mind. And those, I think, are the things that also the religious right really values about people. When they point to humans and say, we're not just apes, we are special, we have amazing abilities, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. We sure do. We diverged from our nearest, anthropoid ape relatives 7 or 8 million years ago, and that's quite a bit of time for distinctively human awesome traits and adaptations and virtues to evolve. And you don't have to just chalk those up to culture or learning. I really think we have a human morality that's quite different and deeper in a lot of ways than the morality of chimps or bonobos.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I think the religious right is correct, but also the far left is correct when they emphasize, humans can be kinder to each other than any other species can be.
Yeah, most of the moral progress we've seen over the last several centuries is pure culture. There's no selective factors in just a couple of centuries to make us more moral. My approach to the evolution of human morality is largely been in response to theists, because that's kind of what I do for a living, is debate people like Dinesh D'Souza, who opens his argument against me with, you're walking along and you see somebody drowning and you run in. and to say them a total stranger, all you guys, evolutionary psychologists say, or evolutionary ethicists can argue is that it's just a byproduct or an accident. It's not genuine morality. You're doing this for reciprocity. You expect something in return, or you just want to up your reputation as somebody who's good, but it's not real morality. So one of my counters is to use some of your arguments and others that you can't just fake being a good person. It's not enough to pretend. I mean, you can virtue signal in the way we mean, in the insulting way. It's a shallow signal that you don't really mean. But in time, people can tell if you're a genuinely good person or not. Well, what's the best way to act like that? It's to actually believe it. Robert Trivers, self-deception and self-deception. If I believe the lie, whatever, and that's not the right word for that, but if I believe this internally, then I'm not going to give off these shallow cues that other people can pick up that I'm faking, like maybe a psychopath would. And to me, that seems as genuine a moral emotion or sense or part of human nature as any theist can offer.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where I think virtue signaling is actually the bridge that takes you from more of a kind of selfish gene point of view to a view that even a Dinesh D'Souza would kind of potentially support, which is, how on earth do you get genuine altruism in humans? I think you get it through virtue signaling. Because look, when we're choosing mates or friends over, for long-term relationships that might span years, and we continually assess, hey, they seemed good and virtuous at first, but are they still good and virtuous? I fell in love with him or her because they seemed nice to kids, but are they still nice raising my kids or our kids? That's a really hard to fake signal of altruism. Or, a woman might fall in love with a firefighter because he actually pursues opportunities for heroic altruism, saving unrelated strangers from fiery death. Well, that's a very high risk, hard to fake form of virtue. And to point out that it has social and sexual benefits is not to undermine that it's a real virtue. I think we got very confused by moral philosophers like Immanuel Kant, right? Saying if a virtue has any social utility whatsoever in your life, then it's not a real virtue. That's not very helpful, Immanuel Kant, because you can't explain the evolution of anything good about us through that kind of perspective.
More maybe Aristotelian virtue ethics, in which you acting as a good person, behaving as a good person, living it, in time you really become more virtuous. You become a better person. It changes, the actions change your thoughts and vice versa.
Yeah, and of course, like my fiance Diana and I talk a lot about virtue because we're both involved in this effective altruism movement, which is a concerted attempt by a bunch of very smart, mostly young people, to do kind of continuous peer review of each other's moral virtues and to try to push each other, nudge each other to do really effective ways of helping others. And nobody there thinks that they're motivated by, angels on their shoulder advising them to do good things just for their own sake. They kind of have a pretty good understanding of virtue signaling, often, I think. But they also can sort of embrace the social nudges that reinforce it and the culture that reinforces it.
Would the billionaires pledge to give away most of their resources after they've left some for their kids? That's a kind of virtue signal, but also then transitioning to a more effective altruism.
Yeah, I think stuff like that is great. And if enough, billionaires signed up, then you'd kind of get into a pluralistic, what's the opposite of ignorance? Knowledge.
Yeah.
You'd get those social nudges where suddenly they'd realize, oh, I can actually get more social status by doing that giver's pledge than by simply having the highest net worth at the moment.
Right. The new Fortune 500 list, or I guess it's I forget what they call it. I think Fortune does have a list along those lines. Who's giving away the most? But even if you say, well, they're just doing it to get on the list, so
that's okay.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think humanity has to really grow up and accept that we do things for social reasons and that's okay. And we do moral things for social reasons and that's okay. And you can actually engineer civilization to work better if you think hard about how do you create those nudges towards, more virtue, more altruism rather than less.
Would you put virtue signaling in an evolutionary model more in sexual selection than the broader natural selection?
I would put it sort of half and half, right? And it kind of depends on what ages you're talking about. I think young single people who are still very much in the mating market, a lot of their virtue signaling might be principally mating effort. It might be mostly shaped by kind of sexual selection forces. But I think if you settle down and you get monogamously mated and you start having kids, then I think a lot of virtue signaling that sort of grown adults and parents do is more about friends, colleagues, neighbors, your general social status. And that kind of maintains it. And of course, you see people switching a little bit from the kind of youthful moral enthusiasms that tend to characterize college students to the kind of moral concerns that tend to characterize people sort of over age 40. And those are often quite different.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just a matter of learning, though. I think it's a matter of signaling different things to different audiences.
Yeah. By the way, as sort of a technical note, when we talk about things getting selected for, how do you explain when there's a whole bunch of different things going on at the same time? You're being selected for preferring a waist to hip ratio of 0.6 and a cheating detection module and somebody who virtue signals their trust. And, there's 20 other characteristics that evolutionary psychologists and biologists talk about are being selected for. How can all that be happening in one set of generations of a lineage?
It's very confusing. And honestly, we have a desperate need for more data scientists and computer scientists and people familiar with evolutionary computation models to model this stuff. Because what really is happening, of course, any given time in evolution is you've got, a mating population, a species, thousands or millions of individuals, hundreds or thousands of adaptive traits are being shaped by hundreds or thousands of different selective forces. And each trait depends on thousands of genetic variants that overlap with other traits.
Mm-hmm.
It's a system of mind-boggling complexity.
Yeah. And you're going to get pleiotropy. You select for one, and then you get a bunch of other things you didn't select for.
Yeah. Each gene influences multiple traits. Each trait depends on multiple genes. And this is something that evolutionary biology itself is going to have to grapple with in a more explicit way, I think, in the coming years, is how exactly can you have so many traits under selection all at once? And obviously they were, because we're here. And other animal species seem incredibly well optimized to do many, many things throughout their lives.
Right. Yeah, maybe computer modeling will help with that. Although I've seen computer modeling in the last few years used to support group selection, which I've always been moderately skeptical of. I don't really have a dog in that fight that much. I listen to the arguments. I kind of go back and forth. I think the group selection skeptics have the day in my mind, but I'm not sure. What do you think about that? Where do you fall in that debate?
Well, in the mating mind, actually, one of my key arguments for moral evolution was that there's a kind of interesting thing that can happen at the interface of individual selection and group selection. Let me see if I can express it simply. Basically, you can have group selection among different virtue signaling systems. Okay, so imagine one tribe where everybody virtue signals by just going out and hunting meat and bringing it back and then burning the meat in a way that produces a nice aroma that the other people can enjoy, but doesn't actually feed them, right? That's a virtue signaling system. You could selectively mate with the better hunters who create nicer aromas. The other tribe, people go out and competitively hunt meat, they bring it back, and then they actually feed everybody else. They distribute the meat altruistically to unrelated tribe members. Well, all else being equal, that second tribe, where you actually share the meat, not just the aromas, is going to outcompete the first tribe. So one level, that is group selection,
Mm.
but it's not the traditional kind of group selection where you're altruistically giving up something for the good of the group but it hurts you,
Yeah.
right? In both tribes, everybody's doing the best they can selfishly,
Right.
trying to virtue signal as best they can. So that's sort of my favorite group selection model. It's called an equilibrium selection model in game theory.
So
And
the target is not the group, but the collection of individuals.
yeah, depending on how
I
you
guess
look
it
at it,
depends on
but
what you mean by group, I suppose.
it's kind of like evolution is favoring groups that figure out a better way to virtue signal within the group, a way to virtue signal that's more reliable, that actually delivers benefits
Yeah.
to others, rather than as just cheap talk, like in the case of sharing the aromas of the meat.
Right. By the way, my understanding of these egalitarian hunter-gatherer groups with, say, food sharing, they really need the norms regularly enforced. Otherwise, the selfish instincts will kick in. The better angels will be overrun by the inner demons, so to speak.
Yeah, you need the policing. Virtue signaling can only work if you occasionally have people calling out each other on you're just cheap talking or you're being a hypocrite. So there's a really important functional role for that kind of feedback within a society, and I think we should acknowledge that and support it.
The shadow of enforcement.
Yeah, the shadow of enforcement, and everybody feeling like I'm kind of accountable. I'm painfully accountable for the virtues that I claim to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this gets us into some larger political implications of these ideas. You and I kind of both lean toward libertarian or classical liberal or, smaller government, socially liberal, pro-choice. I'm pro-choice, for example, and free speech, separation of church and state. But when it comes to, I'm very conflicted when it comes to what extent do we need a central government? And generally don't like big central governments and powers like that because the corruption factor and our human nature gravitates toward exploiting other people and getting as much power as you can. So thank God we have the checks and balances in the Constitution. But even with that, there's a lot of corruption. So I read with relish some of the examples of Western industries like the mining industry and the ranching industry that solved a lot of their own problems before the long arm of the law got out there. On the other hand, they did have higher rates of violence compared to, say, state societies or where democracy got there earlier. Like, Pinker makes this distinction between the New England states versus the southern states. So, democracy got to the South later, so they needed that code of honor or an honor culture to solve their own problems. Well, one of the drawbacks of solving your own problems is higher rates of violence because, people solve them usually in the middle of the night when there's no one around with guns or dangerous weapons, whereas the state has a court system and that's less violent, I suppose. Anyway, so I'm not even sure what I'm asking. I'm just conflicted about this always, that, the Leviathan model that Steve outlines in The Better Angels, makes a pretty strong case that the state has really domesticated humans to a great extent. But the other part of me is, well, I don't like big states because they rob people of so much liberty and freedom and autonomy. So there's a conflict there.
Yeah, the tricky thing is, I'm also kind of a classical liberal by instinct and have been ever since high school. And I was a pro-free speech advocate even in 10th grade. So sort of temperamentally, I really value freedom and liberty highly. On the other hand, you don't have freedom in a kind of Mad Max world of warring gangs and gang violence. And where you do see a culture of honor that only kind of enforces relationships through violence and threats of violence is geopolitics. Relations between nation states that's where the culture of honor is.
Right.
And that's why I'm so skittish about nuclear détente and stuff like that. So, within the borders of a nation state, it's very hard to imagine how you actually have freedom unless you have at least a moderately strong state.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fascinated by politics, political theory, but I will not pretend to have any particular answers to a lot of those issues. All I really have is a set of values for things I would like to see, implemented, and also kind of a sense that civilization as we know it is an incredible but sort of fragile achievement, and it's fairly easy to mess it up, and it will not necessarily regenerate if it's knocked down very quickly.
Except on Mars.
Yeah, hopefully.
Maybe.
Again, we'll learn so much from colonizing Mars, and that's almost even, apart from colonizing the rest of the galaxy, that's almost even a good reason to do the colonization, because we will learn so much about human nature and societies just from doing that experiment.
Right. One of Elon's critics said, yeah, go to the top of Mount Everest and try to live there, because that's what it's going to be like, but worse. This isn't like the Europeans coming to America where there's free food and water and air and there's plenty of resources for the taking. Not like that.
Yeah, when Trump was sort of kicking around the idea of buying Greenland, I don't know how seriously, but I was thinking, would I actually emigrate to Greenland if it was part of the U.S.? And if not, then why would I ever contemplate going to Mars?
Right.
Because Greenland's so much more hospitable.
Right. And even there, it would be a rough life. So immigration, what are your thoughts on that?
It's kind of a third rail issue that I've mostly avoided, even in my copious Twitter life.
Let's think about it from an evolutionary psych perspective. We're naturally tribal, xenophobic, and for good reasons. Mm-hmm. Jared Diamond makes this point in a personal story he told me about, going birding in Papua New Guinea and walking down this little single track trail with one of his Papua New Guinean buddies. And they come across a stranger, and Jared's like, well, let's go talk to him. And his buddy's like, are you out of your mind? This guy could kill us. I mean, there's no natural trust that we have in a civil society. That would be something like, trust but verify, and don't trust anybody until, you have, some indication that they're going to be safe. That's in our nature. So I totally get the build the wall psychology that a lot of people have. Mm-hmm. But I thought by now we would be over this. And yet those instincts, boy, they just pop right back out with a couple of speeches.
Yeah, I think, for libertarian, the key question is, if you've got a country that's pretty good at preserving freedom, and then you open it up to immigration, then are the incoming immigrants likely to be the kind of people who still support that kind of freedom? Right? That for me is sort of a decisive issue. Mm-hmm. And I have not seen very good data on the issue of, which immigrants are the most libertarian in their thinking. Or if you're concerned about, separation of church and state, which immigrants would best support that? Because if you import a lot of people who don't agree with, that there should be secular government and then not theocracy, that could be a really dangerous thing if you import a bunch of people who are kind of temperamentally theocratic in their thinking. So I think the social sciences and the policy wonks just have to be a little bit more honest in doing that kind of research and kind of reporting the results back to ordinary Americans so that we know, hey, if we import these kind of people from this place, what are the likely results in terms of civil society and political values? If we import those people from a different place, what are those implications?
Yeah, most countries do ask those questions.
Yeah.
I think Trump is just so clumsy at explaining, the reasoning behind building the wall or whatever. It leads to this, going the other extreme. No, we should just open up the borders and give them all health care. I mean, like that first Democratic debate was just so ridiculous. How many of you want to give free health care to all they're all virtue signaling, raising their hands. And I think Biden even said, and God bless our troops, just to throw in an extra virtue signal. Obviously, I mean, this has just gotten crazy.
And I mean, even evolutionary psychologists, for all the flack that we get, there's so many issues we're not willing to really touch in a sort of empirical way. Like, I don't know many epsych researchers who have published on immigration issues, taking into account, the sort of natural tribalism and xenophobia that we have, or implications of behavior genetics, or any of that. Because honestly, it's already hard enough to get a job in academia
right.
if you're Darwinian. And touching any of those kinds of issues would be career suicide.
Yeah. When I was in an undergraduate and psych program, one of my psych professors was talking about the race and IQ issue. And this was when Shockley and who was the other, Jensen and a few others like that were in the news. And I thought, holy crap, I am not going into that area of psychology. My God, this is just, untouchable. And that was in the early 70s. And it's only really gotten worse. So I think there are taboo subjects. I mean, we all tick the box. Yes, I think scientists should be able to be free to explore and research anything. I think you or somebody posted a little Twitter survey yesterday. I ticked the box and then realized, wait, everything? And then you did a clarification like, well, not everything. We can't, the Nazis testing, Jews in super cold water or whatever, that's not legitimate science, something like that.
Yeah, there's immoral science in terms of how you do the science, and then there's potentially immoral science in terms of the results of the science.
Yeah.
And I've been doing intelligence research for 20 odd years, and I've been on the editorial board of the Intelligence Journal and so forth. To me, doing research on human intelligence is much less of a risk to civilization than a lot of artificial intelligence research.
Really?
Right.
Well, interesting.
I'm scared to death of AI.
You are.
But the general perception, of course, is doing IQ research is really, really dangerous and must be taboo. Whereas, machine learning is fairly innocuous, and a few jobs will be automated, but it's not a big deal, and we don't need to worry about Skynet Terminator scenarios. I think we do, actually.
You do? Well, not the Skynet, but I mean the argument is that AGI won't even know that it's taking us over or whatever. It just happens.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not evil in a human emotional sense. It doesn't have emotions.
Yeah, it's not evil. It just won't. It won't do the kind of virtue signaling we would like it to do necessarily.
Right.
And there's no. I just think this is one of those things where I'd actually be happy with a just delaying further research on AI. Maybe, we don't have to delay it forever. Just maybe 2 or 3 centuries. I'd be happy delaying it. And part of my own feeling about it comes from my own guilt that, like, the first 30 papers I published were machine learning papers. They're all about neural networks and genetic algorithms and all of that. And some of them are pretty well cited. And now, honestly, I kind of regret doing some of them to the extent that they contributed to any progress in AI that is not being thought through in terms of its full implications. I feel kind of bad about that.
I see you have Pinker's book, Enlightenment, now above you there behind you. Yeah. How do you counter then his argument? Like it's sort of self-refuting in as much as you have a machine or computer, whatever, that's so smart it could take over the world or destroy everybody, and yet so dumb, or so smart it can cure cancer, whatever it's going to do, that's great, but so dumb it doesn't know that it's not supposed to exterminate the human species. Something like it in a more pragmatic level, like the example I use is my Tesla. So I punch in, navigate LAX. Now it's supposed to take me there in the route with the least amount of traffic. So, maybe it goes up on sidewalks, plows through pedestrians because that's the least amount of car traffic and so on. But of course it doesn't do that. It's smart enough to navigate on the roads, but not so dumb that it doesn't know it's not supposed to kill people. Yeah. I mean, surely regulators would be on top of this the moment something bad even inched towards something like that happening.
The problem with machine learning, right, compared to good old-fashioned AI, is good old-fashioned AI where the thought back in the 60s was we're going to write a program in Fortran or whatever that embodies human intelligence and where we can kind of inspect line by line in the computer code, what is it doing? Well, modern machine learning doesn't work at all like that. When I was doing evolutionary robotics as a postdoc in the early 90s, we were evolving robot control systems, neural networks, and we could evolve them overnight, but then it would take maybe a month to analyze what is it doing and why does it work at all. So figuring out, how do you go from a machine learning system that does what you think you want it to do to guaranteeing it's going to behave under all possible relevant circumstances? That's a huge gap. I think it'll be actually very, very difficult for, let's say, government regulators to look at any kind of complex AI and have any assurance that it'll behave kind of on the margins in a way that's pro-human.
Yeah.
And I can't see how you can build in sort of pro-human moral values in the way that would make us comfortable.
Besides, let's say, AI controlling the nuclear stockpile, which I could see a small mistake could lead to an existential catastrophe. But what are there other examples that worry you?
The easiest way for an AI to mess us up really badly would just be in the financial markets. So if you had an AI that figured out, I can make a lot of money through manipulating stock prices and doing exotic derivatives and doing little nudges on the market through either real world effects or fake news or manipulating, information streams, it could easily crash the market globally in a way that led very, very quickly to a real, global depression that could hurt a lot of people.
That's a good example.
And then you get the knock-on effects, right? Then you get the mass economic migration, and then you get the escalation of ethnic conflict, and then you get collapse of food stockpiles, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
So I don't necessarily think, it's going to be AI wakes up, decides it's Skynet, unleashes nuclear hell, but rather AI wakes up, figures out, if I just convert from having a few million dollars in sort of spare change to having a few $100 billion so I can increase my computational power. I can do that by crashing that market or that market. That's more my concern.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, yep, because that has happened a few times where the stock market crashes like 1,000 points in 2 minutes, and then they shut everything down and fix the computer, and then we're back to normal. What you're worried about is that they wouldn't be able to shut it down and start over again.
Yeah, or you could also have an AI that's capable of doing fairly deep research on particular humans, like political leaders, and figuring out, here's all the dirt. I'm going to do the, what do they call it in political campaigns where you're researching all the dirt on oppo research, right?
Okay.
AI did opposition research on leader of China, leader of America, unleashed it all. You could easily have political chaos that was very destabilizing, and it would be really hard to fight against that.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing some of that already with the Russian hacking of the 2016 election, right? Using social media. But what's always bothered me about that, you can give me your opinion about this as a psychologist. It almost implies like, we're Skinnerian rats, and they're just feeding us the pellets in the correct, reinforcement schedule. Like we have no volition, no choice. So they feed me articles about Hillary that are negative or whatever. What am I, an idiot? I can't make my own decisions here.
Yeah. I've done a lot of consulting with market research companies, and there's sort of an illusion among consumers and leftists that, the all-powerful companies are incredibly good at manipulating human psychology, at hiring state-of-the-art psychologists, at pushing all of our buttons, exploiting our emotions. Oh my God, if you actually work with real companies facing
right.
real issues about how to solve actual goods and services, it's surprisingly chaotic, not very scientific. They don't always really know what they're doing.
Right.
And it can be remarkably hard to manipulate consumers or voters.
Yeah, I was looking up that research by Brendan Nyan and Jason Reifler on the role of fake news in the 2016 American presidential election, found that fake news took up far less than 1%. And the only people that would accept as true a crazy story like Hillary Clinton running a sex ring out of a pizzeria would be people that already hate her anyway. They're never going to vote for her. So what difference did that kind of fake news really matter?
Yeah, fake news that just takes people who are sort of far right and turns them into far, far, far right doesn't actually shift elections very much.
Right.
Stuff that affects centrists and independents can shift elections. I'm more worried sort of coming down the technological turnpike about things like deep fakes and the ease of faking video by political opponents in ways that might embarrass them. I imagine that could also affect organized religion, right? If you have deep fakes of some Ayatollah or Imam or the Pope doing things that are embarrassing, you could generate a whole lot of outrage very, very quickly. And
the correction of that would not overdo it or override that because the damage has already been done.
Right. Yeah. So if you have certain kinds of terrorists who are already outraged by just the cartoon depiction of a particular religious figure, how much more outraged might they be by, a full HD color deep fake that's analogous to that and perhaps even more embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, back to your book. Let's go through let's talk about the Google Memo. You have an essay on that, which I read. I forget where that was originally published. I read it back then. I really liked that.
That was Quillette, yeah.
And that was Quillette, yeah. So, I mean, cognitive gender differences in cognitive abilities. That's actually an old field. My friend Diane Halpern, who I've known since the 90s, we tackled both that and race and IQ and Skeptic. We were one of the few journals to do this. When the bell curve came out, I could not find anybody to debate the subject, and I finally got Vin Sarich at UC Berkeley to do it.
Oh, yeah.
He was bold enough to do it. I mean, defend the book. I just wanted somebody to defend it, and just to have, because it is an open debate. And same thing with gender differences in cognitive abilities. And Diane Halpern, she's the leading expert, and she says, yes, of course there are, but where they are, what they are, and so on, obviously matters. So did the Google guy get it right mostly and talking about that?
Yeah, I think he got the science mostly pretty accurate. And in that Google Memo piece for Quillette, I said, yeah, if he turned in the Google Memo as a sort of term paper in my intelligence and creativity class, he would have gotten a pretty good grade because it is an accurate reflection of the research on it's not so much about the cognitive differences between the sexes as the preference and interest differences.
So this would be temperament, personality.
Yeah, temperament, personality, but also what do you want to do with your life? What are your priorities? What's your risk tolerance? What really gets you fired up about going to work in the morning? And I think James Damore was largely pointing out that, look, the kind of stuff at the moment that leads people to do things like become just really passionate about computer programming by age 14, which is what you kind of have to do to level up to, where you're good enough to be hired by Google as a programmer at age 22. Those tend to be kind of male-biased temperamental and interest traits. They're just not as common in women. Women have other, complementary kinds of interests.
So it's not the ability to program, it's the desire to do it.
Yeah, I think it's, why did I spend so much of grad school thinking it's the coolest thing in the world is to run genetic algorithm simulations of sexual selection? That was my real passion, programming that with my, my collaborator.
Woohoo!
And the women in grad school were doing also great research, but they tended to be more interested in like interacting with people at a slightly more concrete level or studying developmental psychology. And there's no shame in the sexes having somewhat different interests. A lot of male interests are absolutely absurd. Like men poring over the specs of this month's new rifle in guns and ammo. I subscribe to guns and ammo, and I find myself doing that and like, why am I trying to memorize, how many pounds of trigger pull this rifle requires? And yet there I am, male brain doing that.
So the theory behind it is that the early infusion of testosterone into the brain later pushes men in certain fields that are more mechanical or physical or something like that.
Yeah, on average. And
yes,
bear in mind, a lot of this stuff is very contingent on how the technology happens to work at the moment. So you can imagine some alternative way that computer programming or machine learning could work that might happen to play more to the sort of temperament and interests of women, right? That it didn't happen to play out like that, but I think in principle it could have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that computation per se is intrinsically male biased. It's just men happen to kind of get there first and maybe develop computer science in a way that kind of fits male brain and male interests
interesting.
better.
Right, okay? Right.
Just like you could take a little bit more of a male-ish kind of approach to social work, let's say, that was a little bit more systematizing or abstract, or that maybe came across as a little bit more heartless, but maybe more effective in certain ways. So I think we just have to take a step back from contemporary culture and realize, okay, there are evolved sex differences, but some of the ways they play out in modern society might be kind of historically contingent. Not in necessarily the ways that gender feminists would say. It's not just, oh, there's human nature plus patriarchy, but in much more subtle ways.
I mean, in the ways, for example, the little meme that had Bill Gates been born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, he would not be the wealthiest person on the planet. I mean, there was just that moment in history when what he did better than anybody else, there was a market for it at that moment, really right down to the month that he did that.
Yeah.
But he's a smart guy. He would have been successful at something, but not $50 billion worth of success or whatever. Right.
Yeah. One of the historical figures I'm kind of obsessed with at the moment is John D. Rockefeller Sr., right, who was able to kind of monopolize oil refining in America by about age 33. I think if you had taken John D. Rockefeller and he had been born at the same time as Bill Gates, he would almost certainly have ended up being a tech billionaire. Just through sheer intelligence, willpower, competitiveness, etc.
I mean, at some early age, say late teens, you can sort of look around the landscape and go, what's the next big thing that I'm going to go for that?
Yeah. And conversely, I think Bill Gates might have done very well as a sort of
railroad tycoon,
age railroad baron. Yeah, given Cornelius Vanderbilt a run for his money.
Right, maybe. Yes. Well, that's an interesting question about the role of culture, history in the context of nature and nurture and all that. We need more research on that.
But I think back to sex differences, the really useful thing, I think, for psychologists and also feminist scholars to do, I think, instead of blaming ancestral males and blaming patriarchy, would be to say, look, what specific things in a particular industry or career are unwittingly functioning as barriers to young women of talent who are interested in doing something, but maybe they don't want to do it in quite the same way that young men want to do it. Can we shift how the field operates, to make it female friendlier or male friendlier in the case of female dominated sciences like psychology?
In the 90s, Sally Ride came to Caltech. She had just started a program for girls in STEM fields, what we now call STEM fields. She was basically concerned about the statistics showing that girls leave mathematics and science type classes around 8th grade. Now, of course, culturalists say, well, that's when culture starts to push women into more domestic or, the softer sciences or something like that, and push men toward these harder sciences or engineering or STEM fields. And yet the behavior geneticist might say, well, no, this is just, temperament coming into fruition at around that age. How do you tease those variables apart?
Well, certainly, around puberty, you're going to get a huge influence of sex hormones influencing brain maturation and shaping the sexes on average to have different ambitions and interests and passions. And, you might end up with, more male passion directed towards STEM topics on average. But what you want to do is make sure that the women who are really interested in STEM don't get deterred. And they might be deterred partly from young men not valuing them doing that, but they also might be deterred from other girls shaming them, calling them nerds. I think often the peer effect is much stronger than presence or absence of role models or culture at large. When I was in high school, I was always falling in love with the girls who were on math team with me because I thought, I've always been sapiosexual. I've always been interested in intelligence.
Sapiosexual?
Yeah.
That's a great term. I've never heard that.
It's often used in the polyamory community
I
and
see.
Alternative sexuality, but that was always my thing. And women who could solve differential equations really quickly, yes, I want to go on a date with her. So I think often the most effective nudges aren't the most obvious and aren't the most intuitive.
Yeah,
and we know this.
There was that story a few months ago about women don't raise their hand in classes. Girls don't raise their hand in class as quickly or as often as boys. I don't know what that's reflecting, testosterone or culture or what, or both. Or
yeah, I think this is where teachers have to do things like develop little hacks, like maybe don't call on the first person to raise their hand, call on the third person to raise their hand. I do that sometime in my seminars. And it tends to favor the shy and introverted.
So that's, okay. So that gets us to this neurodiversity, which you have 2 chapters on in the new book. Super interesting stuff I really never thought about playing a role here in this conversation about how things turn out in business and in the larger industries. It's not just gender.
Yeah. I'm a nerdy guy. I always have been nerdy. And we didn't call it Asperger's back in the day, but I'm certainly on that spectrum. And when the James Damore Google Memo came out, I realized he's kind of a nerdy guy too, well-intentioned, but a little bit socially awkward in terms of not anticipating how much trouble he would get into. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized if you're nerdy, speech codes that say you must always be respectful and never offend anyone will be literally impossible to follow because you won't be able to anticipate other people's reactions. You don't have that theory of mind, that perspective taking. And for a university, for example, to say to a bunch of nerdy young people, you must never cause offense. How do we do that? That's not psychologically plausible because we don't have the social and communication skills necessarily to do that. So I think speech codes and cancel culture in general is intrinsically discriminatory against people with these neurodivergent conditions.
Well, UCLA put out a list of microaggressions. Here's words and phrases you should not use. So maybe distribute the list and memorize it for people that are kind of clueless that way.
Yeah, so if you did that, that would be perhaps helpful. But of course, in no culture can you actually write down everything that's taboo.
Right.
Because the things that are taboo, even mentioning them that is itself taboo. Like if you said, okay, it's taboo to talk about race differences in intelligence, for example, a university itself could get a huge amount of flack even for saying, oh, that's a thing that we're not allowed to discuss. So what happens, in fact, is you can't really codify the reigning cultural and ideological taboos in your campus or your nation in any way that makes sense to outsiders, for example. that's the final essay in the virtue signaling book is Cultural Diversity Case for Free Speech.
Yeah.
And it's particularly focused on the challenge that, let's say, Asian students would face if they come to America to study undergrad or in grad school. How do they soak up what they're not supposed to say?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost impossible. Like, what's the standard textbook for not causing offense in America in 2019?
Right. And in any case, the list changes by the day, depending on what's trending on social media.
Yeah.
I mean, I got hammered by people on the far left and some of my liberal friends for defending Andy No, who I know him, and he's the nicest guy. And, you know, when he got beat up, I came to his defense, and then I got attacked for that. It's like, all right. So then I pounded on the far right for a while because, you know, I usually don't bother because it's kind of a given. We know the far right, you know, neo-Nazis are assholes, and we expect them to act like they do. We don't expect the far left to do that because they're liberals, and we're supposed to be the team of nonviolent protest and so forth. And yet, even saying that, you know, you get into trouble.
Yeah, and that's what motivated me actually to do that video where I interviewed my friend Justin Murphy, who
that
actually
was great. That was one
Antifa.
of the great conversations of all time. Really good.
Oh, thanks.
No, that was great. This is the kind of thing we need to do more. Like steel man, the other side. Okay, what are these guys really thinking?
Yeah.
So in reflecting on that, what I don't know if you can generalize from him to other Antifa members, but you brought up virtue, since we're talking about virtue signaling, how much of it is just virtue signaling versus they really, really believe in the cause, or both?
I think for hardcore Antifa, you know, to the extent that I understand them, it's kind of about half virtue signaling and it's half formidability signaling. It's about kind of the street fighting and the romance of kind of a culture of honor, right? To go back to the Steve Pinker point.
Yeah.
Like Antifa really yearns for a kind of Mad Max scenario where it's like our clan and the other clan, and we have right and virtue on our side, and they are evil, pure evil. And we're going to stand up to them physically and defend our neighborhood, our city, our nation against those interlopers.
Mm-hmm.
But also within our little clan, we're going to virtue signal all of the, you know, fairness and kindness and intersectionality virtues that the far left cares about these days. So it's not just cheap talk. I mean, to be hardcore Antifa, you have to walk the walk. You have to be willing to take physical risks. You're often living in extreme poverty, like you're living in group houses with other Antifa people. You are not getting a lot of money from George Soros. Like, that's a myth. Your life is hard, and you are walking on eggshells because you're always concerned that if I say the wrong thing, I will be expelled.
Oh, by your own people. Oh, yeah.
By your own people. It happens all the time.
Really?
In Antifa. And so they're in a constant state of anxiety and worry that am I good enough still to be here? And then, you know, that's sort of most of their life. And then
so
once
they
in a while
they have to virtue signal to each other
all the time, relentlessly.
Wow.
It's a heavy, heavy burden. So they're not just, you know, making noise on social media. They're interacting with each other in a way that I guess they think it's keeping them on the straight and narrow ethically.
When I heard him talking, that again, what was his name? The guy you talked to?
Justin Murphy.
When I heard him talking, it reminded me when I was a young man, but I had sports. It's like, yes, you put on the uniform and you get out there with your brothers and we're just, you know, mixing it up with the other team, and it's just great fun. It feels good, but it's sports. This is something rather different. But it's the same internal urge.
Right. It's a weird combination of virtue signaling within your group, but also it's kind of a team combat sport. Like, particularly in England, the Antifa guys and the sort of, you know, Brexit or England First guys will kind of coordinate their protests so that they can meet up in the streets and have little fights and
like soccer hooligans.
You know, Scott Adams had some interesting tweets about that. He said, look, maybe you should just set aside part of a city like every Sunday where these guys can go at it
Put them in a
their team
stadium.
sport and put them in a stadium,
Yeah.
charge admission. And I think Justin was able to have that insight into Antifa precisely because he does combat sports. He does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he understands the attraction of that kind of camaraderie that you get in a combat sport. And then Antifa or the Proud Boys just kind of scale that up to the group level.
Mm. Yeah, I wonder if it's something similar on the right happens when congressmen or politicians running for office get raided by the NRA. What is your score of supporting guns? And I suppose in other fields, like how much do you support women or support pro-life and fetuses and so on? You get kind of an internal score of how good you are as a conservative.
Yeah. And I mean, the funny thing there is sometimes you get, a good pro-gun score, and that's a source of pride. Sometimes you get a terrible score from the NRA, and then that's a source of pride. So depending on your position on that issue, nobody ever brags about getting an intermediate score.
That's right. Yeah.
From the NRA. This is why centrism, of course, is so unpopular, because it's really hard to virtue signal as a centrist.
Oh, right. I am medium spicy in favor of this. Yeah, I remember listening to Mark Levin. I listen to conservative talk radio once in a while just to know what these what these people are saying, and you hearing the phone calls they get. Like Levin was hammering on the welfare queens and this welfare state, and women are marrying the welfare state and having these babies when they should have husbands. On and on and on. And then some guy calls and he says, oh man, I'm a huge fan of your show. I voted for Trump. He laid out virtue signal all his conservatives. And I'm on welfare right now because I lost my job. Oh, my brother, this is what you are, the person that welfare was designed to help. Mm-hmm. And it was like, he just switched like that. It's like, okay, yes, okay, it's there to help people that really are on hard times. They're not scamming the system or something. Mm-hmm. But how do you know? I mean, we do have a moral obligation to help people that are homeless or mentally ill or drug addicts or whatever. But there's this other side where it's abused and it expands beyond necessity and so on. I don't know. Another one of these areas I'm conflicted about.
Yeah, I am too. And, I was quite anti-welfare until Andrew Yang came along, and I started thinking about universal basic income.
Right.
And fascinating thing about Yang is he's sort of remaking the case for a welfare state kind of from first principles for the 21st century, right? So universal basic income is mostly about job loss through automation. A lot of it's about a lot of people have mental health conditions that make it really hard to work. Not their fault. What do we do about them? Et cetera, et cetera. And it's led me to, so people sometimes ask, do I support UBI? And I'm like, I don't know, but I think it's worth looking into. And I think it's worth both empirical research and also kind of recalibrating our ethics about, how should society work if you get into a situation where automation means most people are irrelevant to running the economy? Right.
Yeah, Yang opened my eyes to it. But even before Yang, what surprised me, Charles Murray said positive things about universal basic income. And, and he's a libertarian. So this is like one of Christopher Hitchens' favorite lines was, if you hear the Pope say, well, I believe in God today, you think, well, the Pope's doing his job. That's what we expect him. But if the Pope says, I'm having some serious doubts about God's existence, you think, well, he might be onto something. And, so when Charles Murray says, there might be something to universal basic income, I think, whoa, okay, I better look into this. And he makes a pretty good case, very surprisingly, for a libertarian, that at some point, some of the richest people, they're just so far beyond anything reasonable about being rich that, we think of as capitalism. And of course, there's going to be differences in how much people make. And, my friend, Charles Mackey, John Mackey, the head of Whole Foods, CEO of Whole Foods, is a good friend of mine. And he has a book called Conscious Capitalism. So he's a big Ayn Rand objectivist, free markets and so on. But he says, but at some point, really, the CEO should not make more than 19 times the average workers pay. And it's all transparent in Whole Foods, apparently. And that's what he makes, 19 times more than the base rate pay. And if it's 200 times or 500 times, 1,000 times more, like the Disney CEO, Eisner, or I think makes, or Iger makes that, it's like, that's just too much. Now, I have no idea where the line is, but there is a kind of a intuitive, I think, evolved intuition about economics that, at some point, that's just too much.
Yeah, the fairness instincts kick in. And, to me, the more I learned about intelligence research and behavior genetics and the fact that, general intelligence in adults is about 70 to 80% heritable. Mm-hmm. So look, if someone just doesn't have the kind of cognitive abilities required to thrive in a market economy at our current level of technology, what do we do with them? It seems like UBI support is kind of the humane thing to do, to say, we're not going to expect you to work kind of a shitty make-work job that doesn't really need to exist just so you can prove to us that you're virtuous enough to deserve our support. That seems cruel, actually. And in fact, almost everybody I know who works in intelligence research has kind of this view that basically a benign paternalism makes sense for people who are sort of below a certain IQ level. And like, you shouldn't force everybody to participate in the market economy if they're not going to actually deliver value to others, just as a sort of like badge of deservingness.
Yeah.
And it also leads you to have a view that people who happen to have the good fortune to be extremely bright, they didn't individually do anything to deserve that. Their parents may have made really good mate choices, right? Good for them. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't necessarily mean just because you're smart, you deserve 500x more pay than, your Whole Foods cashiers.
Right. One of my other favorite examples I use is one of my best friends, Michael Coles, made millions in the chocolate chip cookie business. He owned the Great American Chocolate Chip Cookie Company, which he sold. Mm-hmm. And he's very generous with his money, and he lives in Atlanta, and he's a patron of the arts and so on. But there's something about, like, he makes cookies. That just seems like a good thing. And you compare him to, like, some Wall Street trader. All he's doing is moving binary digits around on a screen, and this guy makes, $200 million a year or something like that. It's like, what is he producing for society? I can't see it.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, there's like even in investment bankers, there's like good investment bankers who are nurturing little companies that are actually going to do something pro-social and do tech research that'll help people in biomedicine or whatever. And then there's kind of the bad investment bankers who either don't care what their little companies do, that they're grooming for merger or acquisition,
right,
or that actively support kind of companies that some folks would consider, antisocial, counterproductive, evil, whatever. So I think it's important to have kind of a nuanced view even of the functions of finance, right? You can be a good financier or a bad financier.
Yeah. Well, they do take risks. And as is often pointed out, that if I own, say, 1,000 shares of Apple and you own 10,000 shares of Apple and it goes up $10 in one day, you made way more money than me. You didn't do anything to deserve that. On the other hand, the days it goes down $10, you took that risk and you're losing more than me. So I guess we put up with that for a market economy, but there's nothing in our evolved psychology to be comfortable with any of that.
No, and I think this is why I loved what you've written about free markets and the way that a lot of how they work is very counterintuitive. On the one hand, we kind of understand reciprocal altruism and gains from trade, and like, I can give you this and you give me that, and then we're both better off. But at this sort of meta level of emergent effects and free markets and social networks, it's very hard to wrap your head around insights like Hayek's idea of kind of spontaneous order and the way the price system folds in all the information about supply and demand. We are not evolutionarily equipped to appreciate that.
Right. Yeah, because in reality, and here the left has it right, I think, historically, and going all the way back to hunter-gatherer days, anyone that had a lot more stuff than everybody else probably got it illegally, immorally, cheated, scammed the system all the way up till, recently, and still goes on.
That's actually a really good point. That, until the rise of capitalism, almost all wealth disparities were due to force, exploitation, having a sort of protection racket, some gang going around getting money under or resources under threat of force. And I think we carry that expectation around now. Hollywood screenwriters certainly do. Anybody who's rich in a Hollywood movie, any corporation that's successful, is only there by merit of exploitation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. To return to the last chapter in your virtue signaling book on cultural diversity, this brings to mind that, the Harvard lawsuit, which we're all eagerly waiting to see how it turns out. What's wrong with Harvard saying we want economically diverse, culturally diverse, we want people from all over, and we're going to discriminate, and that's our free choice to do that, and it's a good thing to have that kind of diversity. Yet on the other hand, you kind of sympathize with the Asian students, saying, you mean I got to score 400 points more on the SAT than the other guys? That doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, I do sympathize with the Asian students because Harvard's not been upfront about this. They haven't been honest about it. On the one hand, they've portrayed their admissions process as pretty fiercely meritocratic and competitive. And like, if you're the best of the best, you have a shot at getting in. Well, you don't really if you're Asian.
Right.
And they're not willing to say that up front.
Yeah.
They don't share actual data even about these are the sort of minimum admission standards that have historically resulted in Harvard admission as a function of your ethnic group and your sex and where you live. So if they're upfront about it, that's fine. They're a private university. They can do what they want as far as I'm concerned. My kind of libertarian.
Although they do get government money.
Right, they do get government money. So then the issue is, to what extent is the government going to impose race blindness or sex blindness on admissions for universities that get federal grants and federal student loans? That's a really tricky issue.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, I'll just say this, like I said on an interview with Joe Rogan about a year ago, I think universities are due for a massive shakeup.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them will probably go bankrupt in 20 or 30 years. And the way that young people signal, here's what I've learned, here's how smart and conscientious I am, is going to radically change. I don't think the American Bachelor of Arts degree is going to stay the gold standard.
Yeah. I remember when you said that, it got me thinking about the e-learning industry has gotten much larger. And I've just come onto my radar the last couple of months, these master classes. Have you seen this company? Master classes.
I haven't.
So they're like 10 or 12 3-minute lectures by, let's say, Ken Burns does a master class on how to make documentary films. I mean, they have the most famous people in the industry for each of these different fields. And, so apparently they've raised, I don't know, $3 or $4 million in startup. It's a for-profit company. And I think it was $180 for the master pass, so I could watch all of the classes, something like that. And I'm a big fan of the teaching company. I download their courses, audible.com, and of course the what do they call them? The MOOC courses. I don't think those have taken off like people thought they would. But the point is that there's competition for brick and mortar universities and colleges if you only want the knowledge. But of course, there's all the cultural aspects or the social aspects of going to campus and living there.
Yeah, and those social aspects have been systematically, destroyed by university administrators through deliberately minimizing the sort of effectiveness of the mating market on campuses and basically discouraging undergrads from dating each other. and also reducing the benefits of kind of assortative socializing through things like discouraging whatever Christian student groups or foreign student groups, stuff like that.
Republican student groups.
Yeah, and you know, if you're an adult and you want to learn any given thing, like I launched a YouTube channel recently and set up a YouTube studio in my basement and had to figure out how do you do all the camera and lighting and editing and all of this. You learn it through going to YouTube and watching YouTube videos by other YouTubers.
Right.
You don't learn it by going to your local community college
right.
and taking a class on video editing.
Right.
So I think the future of learning is completely up for grabs.
Totally.
And the scientists and thinkers and intellectuals who really want to have an impact now, I think have to do it through social media.
Yeah.
And can't just assume, oh, if I teach 100 undergrads per course for 30 years, that'll be my legacy.
Right. Yeah, here in California, we now have affirmative consent for sexual encounters, mainly applied to college students. Yep. This is really troubling to me because to prevent it from just being he said, she said, you'd have to record your sex. I mean, this is a terrible idea.
Yeah. There was a great South Park episode about a dorm where the guys actually take affirmative consent seriously and make all the women sign, affirmative consent contracts before sex.
They did that? I didn't know they did that because back in 2004, Jason Reitman made a little 5-minute video called Consent. Mm-hmm. Have you seen this one?
Mm-hmm. I haven't.
Oh, it's great. It's a couple in like a dorm room or whatever, and they're sitting on the bed and they're just smooching and talking and giggling and so on. And it starts to get kind of a little hot and heavy. So he says, well, I should probably get that thing. And she goes, yeah, you should. You think he's going to reach for a condom, and he pulls out a contract and he says, have you seen these? He goes, yeah, I've seen those. So they start to go through it, and then she says, is it okay if I bring in my lawyer? And he goes, yes, of course. So this woman pops up, and then his lawyer pops up, and the two lawyers go back.
I have seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. The lawyers go back and forth going through the list of what is and not acceptable, and they sign off. And then at the very end, they're done with the contract and they're about to get into it, and the door opens, and it's the roommate, the female roommate. And she says, should I get my lawyer? And that was 2004. That was pretty prescient because that's kind of what it's come down to now. Because otherwise, how would you prove what the consent?
It is very tricky. I was actually on the university committee to revise our sexual misconduct policies at my university. And I worked with them for a year and a half. And the problem with affirmative consent is I kept asking my other committee members, look, let's get real. Boy undergrad meets girl undergrad. They go on a date. They have a drink or two. How exactly is affirmative consent supposed to work? How many times during the course of a typical encounter, from first kiss to copulation, is he supposed to ask for consent? Are we talking like 2 questions or like 20? And everybody else on the committee was like, we can't say that. No way could we say an expected number of questions. And I was like, okay, let's at least talk about typical stages of escalation, like touching boobs or getting undressed or whatever. The irony is they were all so uncomfortable with sex itself that they couldn't even draft a sexual misconduct policy that was clear enough for an average 18-year-old freshman to understand. So, in other words, they're hiding behind vagueness as a kind of virtue signal, in a way. And they're just throwing these poor students to the wolves, saying, we have a very strict affirmative consent policy, but guess what? We're not going to tell you anything about how it should actually work in practice.
Until there's an incident, and then we call you in, and then we're going to tell you.
Right. And then we'll tell you how it was supposed to have worked.
Right.
And I think that's a terrible kind of bait and switch.
Yeah. In a way, it's, I don't know, get back to your evolutionary psych and your previous book on mating. I mean, we know the gender differences, like the famous study of where you walk up to somebody and say, I saw you standing there, I found you attractive. Would you go out with me tonight? Versus, would you go back to my apartment with me tonight? Versus, would you have sex with me tonight? Not one woman said yes to the final question. And you don't even have to say which is which. You just put up the charts. I do this in a lecture. Guess which one, which gender is which. And everybody knows which gender it is. In all the surveys showing, men would, basically women need a reason to have sex. Men need a place to have sex. Men would have indiscriminate sex with people they just met. They don't even know their name. Women are not like that. So what if he had a program, like an introductory program for all incoming first-year students saying, these are the sex differences. Guys, when you go out on a date, the women are not expecting to have sex. Just assume you're not going to have sex. Don't even think about it. And, 3 dates in, 6 dates in, whatever it is, and maybe it starts to move to that. Assume that she may want to stop. It's sort of a behavior control mechanism through knowledge.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be useful if it was done in a sort of intelligent, hopefully lighthearted and funny way. Like, you want to be lighthearted enough to get the student's interest and not to feel too awkward and ashamed about this is about sex,
Yeah.
But you want it to be serious enough that they get the kind of ethical gravitas of the situation and go, oh yeah, this could actually really hurt people if I mess it up. Problem is, if you talked about sex differences to the incoming students, then the gender feminists would say you're reinforcing the gender binary, you're reinforcing patriarchy, you're doing all the things that we in the social sciences abhor and don't support, and that we think we have scientifically disproven. They haven't, but so there's that conflict that the faculty can't agree on what basic framework to give the students about how to think about men and women and sexuality.
Yeah.
And I'm struck when I teach a course on psychology of human sexuality. I've taught it about 12 times. I get, about 100 students per term. And I ask the students straight up, raise your hands if you thought you got good sex education from your parents about sex differences and relationships. About 1% say yeah.
Wow.
Hands up if you think you got good sex ed from high school health class. 2% say yes. Hands up if you have any previous courses that covered sexuality at all. Maybe 5 out of 100. So it's not like they're getting information about human sexuality.
What about religion?
From any reliable sources.
I guess religions don't really give good advice on that either, other than just don't. Abstinence.
Right. Abstinence-based education, we know, is not effective at reducing
unwanted pregnancies.
Teen pregnancy or any of the other things that it claims to do.
Even worse because then they go in unprepared. They think, well, I can't take birth control because that'll imply that I might do something, and I'm not going to do something, and then they find out later that they made a mistake. Yeah.
So it's a mess, and I think universities are really failing in our obligation to give decent education about sex and relationships to young people. Yeah.
Now, my conservative friends, like Heather McDonald, for example, says, well, women should just be more careful, or not careful. They should just practice abstinence. They should have good old conservative values, like I'm not going to have sex until marriage or until much later, until I really know the guy. And maybe so she's making the case that conservative values are coming to fruition now. Look what's happened without conservative values. Now, she's not nasty about it. I made it sound worse than it is. But, I mean, what do you think about that point?
I mean, I have quite a bit of respect in a way for sort of trad life, traditional religion and pronatalism and family structure and all of that. And that might sound weird coming from Darwinian polyamorous, but there we are. The problem is, I think sex in marriage, even for evangelical Christians, can be so important as a part of their relationship and their spirituality and their relationship to, God and Jesus, that they should actually try each other out before marriage and make sure they're sexually compatible. I think it's that important. And you can do that with fairly low risk emotionally and physiologically in terms of contraception and safe sex and STI testing.
Yeah.
Now the emotional dangers of bad drunken hookups, I think, are there. Those are real. I think sort of Tinder culture is often very toxic, and this is why I think there's a potential weird kind of alliance that could happen between kind of Christian traditionalists and the polyamory community. Because what they both hate in common is reckless, unethical, dishonest Tinder hookup culture.
Right.
That's kind of the common enemy.
Right.
And that, I think, is what causes a lot of these troubles that your friend talked about.
Well, Heather McDonald, her other point that she makes is that in the sort of the history of the academy, or even the larger culture, it used to be that the default position for women is, I'm not having sex with you tonight. That's it. And you know that. Now you can go ahead and try to charm me and woo me and so on, but just assume we're not having sex. And then if I change my mind, okay. The new default position is, we're having sex. You can just go ahead and count on it. But then if I change my mind, I have to talk you out of it. So now the burden of proof is on the woman to convince the guy the answer is no, and she has to sell him on no, whereas no was the default position. Anyway, that's her appraisal of the last 40, 50 years in America, I guess.
Of course, what's ironic is that both from the left and the right, very few people talk about the elephant in the room, which is the sex ratio on campus.
Oh, right.
That, I think, is what's really driving a lot of this.
It's about 60-40 now, women, men.
Right. It's often 60-40. So if you have 150 young women on a campus for every 100 young men, the men are in short supply. Their preferences will set the agenda, and the women will have to compete very hard to have sex earlier, more often, in more extreme ways to kind of outdo each other. If you really want to fix that culture, equalize the sex ratio. Try to make it so more men go to college and don't, drop out of high school. I think that would be more powerful than trying to change the culture.
Why has that happened, that ratio difference? And that's just maybe the last quarter century or so?
It's surprisingly recent. Back in 1970, there were far more men than women at college. And that's when you had the women having the bargaining power,
right?
Of saying that the expectation is, no, we won't have sex.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting difference of that default position there, the gender ratio. That would make a difference. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. So that started shifting maybe more in the 2000s or 2010s.
I think it's basically since about 1990, you had a kind of sex ratio reversal in higher education in America. Why did that happen? Lots of reasons, but one reason, I think, is a lot of young boys and young men go through public K through 12 education, getting a sense that, education is a female-friendly, female-dominated culture. Most of my teachers are female. They set the agenda in terms of, I'm supposed to sit still and act like a well-behaved girl and not like a boisterous boy. We don't have physical recess anymore. We don't have sports. I can't blow off steam. We have to do all these course exercises that are more oriented towards group work and sharing feelings and virtue signaling, basically, and less towards traditional boyish interests. So I think a lot of young men kind of get the sense that education is not welcoming. It's not inclusive to my sex. And college will probably be even worse. And they're largely right about that.
Particularly in the social sciences and humanities, maybe not so much in the STEM fields. Yeah. Well, that's another issue. I don't know if we want to dive into that of, the war on boys, that whole meme. But the fact is, most suicides, most homicides, most prisoners, men. There are those gender differences that women do not want to catch up on.
Yeah, and I mean, in my field, psychology, it is very female dominated, and I mean, maybe that's okay. Problem is, you know, my university trains virtually all of the clinical psychology PhDs who practice in the state of New Mexico.
Mm.
And they're not really being trained, I think, very well to deal with male clients or to take the male point of view in couples therapy or marital therapy or family therapy.
You mean if they had Tony Soprano sitting in front of them, they wouldn't know how to deal with that?
They wouldn't know how to deal with them. Yeah. And of course, they make a lot of noise about respecting diversity and inclusion, except when it comes to including men as therapists or as clients or as people worth really valuing in their own right. So I think when a lot of guys go to marital therapy, they're kind of bracing for a female therapist to basically say, you know, the problem with you is basically you're a guy. And if we can make you more like a woman, your marriage is savable. So if you can share your feelings better, if you can increase your verbal fluency, if you can take more interest in people, then maybe you'll be okay. And I think that's basically malpractice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm old enough to see this pendulum swinging back and forth in the academy and larger culture. I wonder if all this is, you know, we're just in the middle of one of these trends that's going to blow back the other way in another 5 or 10 years. All the things we've been talking about, you know, the obsession over gender differences in outcomes of occupations to the treatment of boys and so on.
I hope the pendulum swings back, but it's kind of hard to see exactly how that would happen. You might get, I don't know, how could it happen? Let's say you had a private university that said, we only admit men. I don't think that would be legal anymore.
No, right? I don't know.
Or even one that said, we're going to try to make it male biased, or that would be tough. So it's hard to see how you get the kind of social organization that would lead anybody to actually fix this issue. To create the kind of virtue signaling incentives, you know, say standing up for the interests of boys and men is a good thing. The manosphere tries to do that, but they get flack from every possible direction.
I watched some Netflix documentary on, I forget the name of it now, but it was a female feminist journalist who went into the men's movement and interviewed all these guys and came out going, whoa.
Lacey Green?
Yes, that's the one. I thought, wow, she's got a great point. And again, it's like, you know, the Pope says, I have some doubts about God's existence. You think, well, might be onto something. When she, you know, here's the feminist saying this, and okay, so they got my attention, and I tweeted something positive about it, and of course got a heap of hate put on my head for that. I was like, oh, okay. And that brings us to the last subject of your virtue signaling book is free speech. I mean, we should be able to say anything we want, but just to steel man the other side argument, you and I, or probably most of us, are not going to use the N-word. That's the most obvious example of things we shouldn't say. And one reason we shouldn't say it is because language matters. It changes the way we think about other people, and thoughts matter because they translate into behaviors. So doesn't cultural change, the changing moral zeitgeist, begin with language? Therefore, we should have some policing of language. And from there, then you start building up and you end up with trigger warnings and microaggressions and safe spaces and so on.
I'm kind of a free speech absolutist on the one hand, at the legal level, at the constitutional law level. Like, I'm really worried about the government or any of its subsidiaries telling people what they can and can't say. Now, of course, a public university like mine is literally an arm of the state with respect to First Amendment issues. But if you try to get a university like mine to bring its policies into full alignment with the First Amendment, it's almost impossible. Nobody will do that.
Right.
So that's one issue. Then at the kind of cultural level, of course, we can all encourage each other to speak in more constructive and less incendiary ways. And that's good. And we can kind of virtue signal our concern about certain issues by lightly and gently policing each other's language around certain things. But I think it's extremely important to do that at an informal level. Right? for corporations not to be the police, for government not to be the police, even for things like scientific societies not to police how their members talk or teach. So as long as it's bottom up, that's good, because that aggregates all the information about everybody's values and ethics and priorities. But once it starts to be top down, then people will fight for control of the censorship apparatus. Yeah. And that's where you very quickly get into trouble.
Totally. Yeah, I explored some of that in The Moral Arc, just like what Dawkins calls the changing moral zeitgeist in The God Delusion. One of the inspirations for The Moral Arc was this chapter on how he could identify a passage from a novel, basically down to the decade it was written, by how the novelist spoke about women, Jews, and blacks, for example. Yeah. Yeah. And some of them just cringeworthy to read now. How did this happen? There's no government policy that, said, okay, from now on you have to use these words. No, it's just kind of screenwriters, television writers, novelists, cartoon writers, and so on. Just everybody from the bottom up, just changing ever so slowly. Slow enough you don't really notice it. And then until you look back and go, wow, look at how people used to talk about this and now they don't.
Yeah, it's very effective. We have so much historical evidence that kind of bottom up language change really works. And it's very compelling, and you don't really need the top-down imposition of language change unless you don't actually have, your convictions lined up. If you think, oh, I might actually not win the debate at the natural level, therefore I have to seize power and do it by force. And to me, that's one of the most repulsive aspects of kind of the far left social justice warriors, is that they don't actually have the confidence that they can win people's hearts and minds through normal discourse.
Through reason and argument.
They have to seize the levers of power and do it by force and cancel culture.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, on the right, religion tries to do that. I mean, religions want political power. And, this whole white nationalism business, Christian nationalism, is a form of that. Like, we want the reins of power. There's another documentary that just aired on, I think it was HBO, but anyway, it's on Netflix. The Family. It's called The Family. I think it's 4 or 5 parts.
It's on my watch list.
It's really good. It's not scary like, here's this, far right neo-Nazi. No, they're very subtle. They don't want media. These are just people that, well, the most recognizable one is the National Prayer Breakfast. Yep. Everybody's heard of it, and I never knew who was behind it until this documentary. It's this family. It's this group of people that want to push Christian values in politics. They want their particular agenda voted in by law through these politicians they support, and it's to the point now where if you don't show up to this prayer breakfast, you are persona non grata. And they pull a lot of strings in terms of financing and money, backing of elections and so on. That happens there too.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, the way to, fight that is, I used to be much more of a hardcore atheist maybe than I am now, and there's kind of a long story that has to do with the simulation hypothesis about why I'm a little more of an agnostic now.
Oh, okay.
But it also has to do with, close members of my family kind of converting to Catholicism and me learning more about that and so forth. And kind of getting more involved in conservative politics and learning about their perspectives, even if I don't share them. I think the way to influence, people who are Christians, evangelicals, is learn more about their concerns and figure out what common ground do they have with my concerns.
Right.
And there actually is quite a lot often, but it often goes unrecognized because particularly people on the far left think they have so little in common with people on the far right that there's just no point in even talking or learning or going to a mega church even once or any of that. And my view is the virtue signaling that we do is often we're signaling like the same small set of virtues, but in wildly different ways. And if we just get a better map of oh, that's how they're signaling that virtue in that subculture.
Mm.
I like that virtue too.
Hmm.
I'm signaling it in a different way in my subculture. But actually, we can agree that that's a good thing to promote. Now let's have a discussion about how to promote it most effectively.
I've been trying that on the abortion issue, appealing to conservatives and pro-lifers that, the problem isn't abortion. The problem is unwanted pregnancies, right? I mean, if women weren't getting pregnant when they didn't want a baby, they wouldn't be having abortion. So what's the best solution to decrease the number of percentage of unwanted pregnancies? Okay, now education, birth control, and so on. Well, so then they're a little uncomfortable with that, but we have the same goal.
Yeah.
And then it's really just, well, how do we get there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the problem of censorship, back to the purging of social groups, I think this is a very old and probably common, there's probably an evolutionary psych explanation behind it. Because I wrote about this in my first book, Why People Believe Weird Things. I have that chapter on Ayn Rand, the unlikeliest cult in history. And again, it's just like we have the absolute truth. And if you don't adhere to each of the 12 points or whatever, all of them, then you're out. And, by the time she died in 1982, there's only like a dozen or so people at the funeral, and her huge objectivist movement had fizzled out because it came right. All those biographies that were published in the 90s about her, there was two major ones, showed that, she was purging people based on the cigarette brand they smoked, this kind of music they listened to, the movies they went to, because there was a true objectivist standard for the right music. And so on. And my partner, Pat Lindsay, who does Skeptic Magazine art and covers and so on, she's a little older than me. So she remembers that when the feminist movement kind of disintegrated, like, who is the purest feminist? And if you are not this pure by meeting all these standards, you're out. And the atheist movement kind of went through this after Dawkins' book in 2006, kind of elevated atheism to a big thing. Then the first split was, are you militant enough? Are you like Hitch and Dawkins going after these faith heads that are just complete idiots for believing in God? We gotta make fun of them. And if you weren't along that lines, then you're not a real atheist. And then after that, there was the atheist plus movement, which is the plus is social justice values or whatever movement. And so it's atheism plus social justice. And if you're not on board with all the points of social justice politics, then you're not a true atheist. And it's like, I'm just going to quit using the word. I'm a skeptic or whatever. Yeah. And I have a feeling there's an evolved psychology behind that. Just, social movement splinter for these purity tests. And that gets us back to your virtue signaling.
Yeah, it's really hilarious. Like on Twitter, I often promote traditionalist architecture, representative art. I love 19th century art. I hate modernist art and architecture. And most of the other folks active on social media promoting traditionalist art tend to be quite politically conservative, monogamist, etc. And then when they find out I'm this Darwinian polyamorous, they're totally shocked. Like, how can you have sexual ethics that deviate so much from your aesthetic values? And it's like they're actually compatible, but it's kind of like Ayn Rand caring about your cigarette brand. These things might happen to be a little bit statistically correlated, but they're not logically linked. And you can love Victorian art and also love sexual deviancy or whatever. Like it. I love the fact that it's often very hard for people to predict my political views on issue X from my political views on issue Y. Mm-hmm. And all the most interesting people I know are like that. They're kind of a patchwork.
Right, because you think about each issue separately rather than this is the box that I'm in and these are the things that are in my box, so I just check them, all the boxes.
Yeah, yeah. So I think if there's no clear political term for what your beliefs are, you're doing it right.
I agree. Well, that's a good place to end it. Geoffrey, we've been going 2 hours, a little over 2 hours. We're about halfway through a Joe Rogan marathon. I don't have quite that stamina, but I really enjoyed the conversation. Let's look again one more time. Here's your cover. I love the cover. Virtue Signaling, Essays on Darwinian Politics and Free Speech. You can download it there's a website for it, right? Called Virtue Signaling. Tell us how to get the book.
At Gumroad, Gumorad, gumroad.com, you can find it. Or just
Gumroad.com.
go to any of my YouTube channel videos, and I have the link under all the videos.
Amazon too, or no Amazon?
It'll be out on Amazon probably within 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, good. Yeah. And it's just a few bucks, so it's great. I'm glad you're doing that.
Thanks.
Super interesting. All right. Thanks again.
Take care.
Bye-bye.